What's up, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls around the world? I would like to welcome you back to the Real Talk with Zuby podcast. On today's episode, we are going to be talking about cryptocurrency and Bitcoin in particular. And who better for that than Bitcoin educator and investor, Stephen Cole. How you doing, Stephen?
Hey, Zuby. Doing well. Thanks for having me.
That's all good. Now, the people listening who are tuned in are not going to know this, but this is actually our third time recording an interview, but this is the first one that's actually going to go out. So Stephen and I have spoken a few times, but this time, lots of exciting stuff has been happening in the meantime. So we figured we'd have to do it one more time before we get it out there. So why don't you introduce yourself to the people and let them know a little bit about you?
Yeah, for sure. Third time's going to be a charm. And hopefully well-timed too, because it's been a good few weeks for Bitcoin. So as far as myself and my background, Bitcoin educator and investor, have been involved in Bitcoin since late 2013, early 2014, in various capacities. And my background prior to that is mostly internet technology. So academically, computer science, and have been in sort of the web technology industry for a while, was an engineer at eBay and a couple other enterprise companies, and then worked in sort of engineering leadership at some tiny scrap companies as well. So kind of good breadth of experience across internet tech, and Bitcoin has really had my heart since 2013. That's been the passion. And awesome. As far as involving in Bitcoin, has been Bitcoin's a very big, multifaceted subject. So have exposure to many different facets of it, have mined Bitcoin, have invested directly in the kind of protocol and asset itself, traded, though I'm certainly not a short-term day trader type, and have invested in done a small amount of investing in seed rounds of startups in this space as well.
That's awesome, man.
Decent breadth of exposure.
So how did you first come across Bitcoin?
Late teen, was living and working in San Francisco at the time. So surrounded by all the Silicon Valley hype, a lot of people very in tune with technology, and noticed that a lot of the smartest people I knew in my life just would not stop talking about this thing. And to me, I really didn't understand it at first, because I saw Bitcoin as, I would see maybe the sticker by the cash register at one or two places in my day-to-day ever. And in my head, it was just like yet another way to send money, right? It's yet another Venmo, PayPal, Visa, MasterCard, and there's a lot of those. So you get kind of fatigued, right, with all the options, and every week there's a new app there. So initially I shrugged Bitcoin off, just kind of dismissed it as like yet another payment app.
Biggest regret of my life doing that.
Right? Right there with you. Seems to be a common theme among people who are believers now. But luckily, those friends of mine were very persistent, and they kept telling me, no, this thing's actually a big deal if you dive more deeply and you read about it. So finally I did, and that was early 2014 when I really started tumbling down the rabbit hole. And to kind of summarize, I know a lot of the listeners here may not be familiar with the details of what Bitcoin even is, but I would say the single most important thing to drive home about it that took me a while to realize is it is not just a way to send money. It is a new type of money entirely. And it turns out it might be a really, really good one.
Awesome, man. I can see the smile on your face and the passion coming through your voice right there, man. So what is it that excites you so much about Bitcoin? Like I'm excited about Bitcoin myself. I'm a bit later to the game than you. So my certainly in terms of investment, I've been through the brutal period, but not the good times. So but I remain ever the optimist. But what is it that what is it that excites you so much about the technology or the concept of this new type of money?
Sure. So right now, what excites me most about Bitcoin is its potential as money, as sort of sound money is the phrasing you'll hear a lot in economic terms. It's funny because that wasn't at all what excited me about it initially. I think with my background being a little bit more technology and computer science oriented, I viewed it through that lens, and I just kind of thought of it in computer science terms. So, okay, there's this, new, different looking technology, and I was fascinated because I eventually realized, like, yes, they solved the problem of digital scarcity. So now there can be a limited number of something digital. And with Bitcoin, that's really the first time that that's been possible without having to trust or rely on some third party or some institution. So that, in my opinion, was Satoshi's really big breakthrough. You'll sometimes hear that phrased as Satoshi, the creator of Bitcoin, solved the double spend problem. But another way to frame it is, he discovered a way to create a limited number of something digital. And so that got me thinking about all of the ways, just technology-wise, that could be implemented or that could change things. So, would we have these digital collectibles that are kind of based on Bitcoin? Would we be able to implement Bitcoin in terms of like micropayment use cases to kind of fuel online transactions and remove humans or remove some third parties from, maybe email or advertising? Maybe you pay a little bit of Bitcoin every time that you stream a video. And it kind of got me tumbling down that rabbit hole of weaving economics into the internet. Now that there is that protocol for money. But and to be clear, I still think there is enormous potential for use cases like that. But the more that I learned about economics from this Bitcoin fascination, the more excited I became about simply Bitcoin's use as a store of value and as kind of sound money in the way in which it competes with the central banks and the fiat currencies that we all know and kind of
don't necessarily love.
Quotes, yeah. Right? Yeah. For our whole lives.
So when you say sound money, to someone who's not familiar with that principle, I think we're going to need to go back and break down a little bit of terminology. So when you say sound money, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, certainly. And so we can kind of dip our toe into some economic waters here. And I'll preface this by saying that to anyone who does want to learn more about Bitcoin and economics, the must-read book is Safety Amus's The Bitcoin Standard. You can buy that on Amazon. And Vijay Boyapati wrote an excellent Medium post called The Bullish Case for Bitcoin. So those really offer a lot more detail on this. But to kind of give you the summary version and maybe a teaser, money, we've kind of existed for the last few hundred years in this era of fiat money. So, nation states, governments issue debt, bring new dollars or yen or fiat currency into creation. And that gives them an enormous amount of power and leverage. And the more of that they do, the less valuable all of the existing units become, right? So if you have a stash of dollars in your bank account and every year, there's sort of 2% inflation or the supply is being increased by any number, then yours gradually become worth less over time. There's not really been a free market competition environment around money in our lifetimes because it's just sort of government imposed, right? You must pay with dollars in this country and pesos in this country and so forth. Prior to that wasn't the case at all. So, gold, silver, going back much further, things like seashells, those really competed for status in a free market for what's going to be the most dominant way to store and protect your value, what's going to be the dominant way to exchange value, to trade day to day, and what's going to be the dominant way to kind of list prices or think about value. And potentially all those functions are performed by the same asset, or maybe, one is used for some and other assets are used for other functions. But if you kind of analyze Bitcoin alongside fiat money and even things like gold that were used as money prior to fiat, then you start to see that Bitcoin is lined up pretty impressively. So it's got a lot of strengths relative to its competition. Scarcity, as we mentioned earlier, being one of the premier ones. So the fact that there is this fixed supply, because there's no single entity that controls Bitcoin. There's no, single Bitcoin company. There's no CEO who can whimsically make more of this stuff. The monetary policy is really fixed and unchangeable. So the ultimate supply of Bitcoin is going to be limited to 21 million only. Mm-hmm. And that, along with its other strengths as far as being able to send it digitally anywhere in the world, in a much smaller amount of time than its alternatives like gold or wire transfers, I think give it just enormous potential to do really well here.
Awesome, man. So I feel like we should have done this at the very beginning, but I'm sure there is somebody listening right now who has probably heard of Bitcoin, but doesn't really get it. So if you were, obviously we've both got computer science backgrounds, so we could probably talk decently technically and not confuse each other. But for someone who just, is not remotely computer sciencey-ish or isn't well-versed in technology and all that kind of stuff, how would you explain to them what Bitcoin is and why they should care? Not necessarily even why they should invest, but why, so many people just kind of shrug their shoulders and are like, we've already got money. Like, why do we need this thing? This is just fake magic internet money. What's the point? So can you expand on that a little bit more in layman's terms?
Absolutely. And I'll preface that by saying that it's good to be skeptical of these kinds of things in general. Like when you hear people talking about new potential investments that can be made or new forms of money, I think a lot of defenses tend to kick in and people hopefully have a healthy skepticism there. And I think that's good. I would not encourage investing in anything you don't understand. And even everything that I'm saying on this podcast, I would encourage everyone to go out, do their own research, really become confident in it, and have a goal and a strategy in mind before you formally do anything in this space. All of that said, I think that the reason to kind of be excited about and why I hope people would be willing to go and learn more about this is just that it could be the type of once in a lifetime opportunity, really more rare than once in a lifetime, once every few centuries type of opportunity in which we witness a new type of money emerge organically. So going back, I guess, to a little more of Bitcoin 101 to set some context for that. Bitcoin isn't just a company. So when you buy Bitcoin, you are not registering an account with some centralized organization like Facebook, where you go and create username, password, you log in. We all know that pattern really well from using the internet, right? So Bitcoin is a little bit initially because
sorry, man. Can you repeat
this centralized?
Sorry, man. If you just repeat what you said, it just cut out for a sec.
Gotcha. Yeah, I kind of saw that here on my end as well. All right. So I think what's hard to grok about Bitcoin is that it's not this centralized service similar to, a Facebook or a Twitter, where you go and register with a company, you create a username and password, and then you kind of log in and they own and they control that whole experience and they can shut it down or do whatever they want with your data at any moment. Bitcoin is decentralized. So it's a little bit more like the internet itself. It's like asking who controls the internet or even who controls the English language are kind of rough but good analogies for thinking about control and ownership in Bitcoin. So the same way that you and I could start speaking English slightly differently, the incentives are for us to kind of speak in ways that everyone understands and will communicate with us on and can agree with. So anyone out there can go and they can take the software that implements Bitcoin and they can change it and they can do whatever they want and they can try to improve upon it. But what they can't do are really force the changes that they're making upon anyone else in the system. So reflexively, everyone who hears that Bitcoin is limited to 21 million will say, well, why can't they just change that number? Why? It's just software. Why can't somebody go out and change that 21 to whatever they want and make more for themselves or for anyone else? And I too was asking all those questions. But Bitcoin is set up with this brilliant set of incentives to make that impossible. So you can, and many people have, cloned or copied or forked is kind of the technical term that you'll hear. They have created similar versions or different cryptocurrencies that make some changes to the code base. But ultimately, what they can't do are really, force anyone who doesn't want to go that route to follow them along that path. So they really have to compete in the free market. And if they think they have an idea that's better than Bitcoin, got to convince others.
So basically a big network effect.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you'll hear a lot, there's a term Metcalfes Law that kind of describes the exponential rate of growth in these decentralized systems and these kind of network effects and protocols. And when you look at adoptions of new technologies, so there's this graph that circulates a lot on Twitter that's fantastic that kind of shows curves of adoption for various technologies like the radio, the television, and then the internet, and then centralized sites like Facebook or social media. And as technology and information improves and information can flow and spread more quickly, these curves of adoption just keep increasing they just go up a lot more quickly. And so we've only just started, we're in the very early days with Bitcoin. And if its adoption follows a similar curve, then, we've only just begun to see the potential.
The hopium is starting again, especially with the rise in the past couple of days. I remember looking when it broke 7,000. I was like, oh. Then it broke 8,000. I was like, oh, okay. The phoenix is rising. The phoenix is rising from the ashes. I wasn't quite done packing my bags, but I've been slowly accumulating for the past year. So yeah,
good stuff, man. Yeah, it's been a nice couple of weeks, and we've got to sprinkle a little bit of hopium around. Can't resist.
So here's the big question, of course, from an investment perspective. And something that I've been asked about a lot of times is obviously you get people who compare it to other hype bubbles. So whether that is Tulips or what's the other one people use? Tulips is the big one, but just this sort of hysteria of just people are just buying something without knowing what it is or having lots of inherent value or whatever, and that the whole thing is just like a huge Ponzi scheme that's based on hype and spreading hype. And so we're here spreading hype to other people, so they buy and our money goes up and then they spread it. And so what's your counter to that? What's the fundamental value proposition? Why does Bitcoin actually have value?
Yeah, it has value because some people today believe that it has value. And that explanation makes many people uncomfortable to hear, right? But what is often forgotten is that that's the same reason that the US dollar has value.
Exactly.
And the US dollar is not backed by gold or any physical asset anymore like it was decades ago. So really, we use it and we believe that it will be worth roughly as much when we wake up tomorrow as it is today because we see that other people around us believe that. And with Bitcoin, it's still very volatile because the subset of people who are aware of it and who believe in it is still relatively small in the world. So as just the amount of liquidity, the market capitalization, the amount of wealth that's essentially stored in the system is a drop in the bucket compared to the larger financial system. So therefore, you get a ton of volatility, right? Like if Warren Buffett or Bill Gates really wanted to go hard on Bitcoin right now, then they would have a material impact on that market capitalization. Whereas if they decided to do the same thing with the dollar or some other currency, there's enough liquidity there that it would be a good thing, but it wouldn't really move the needle as much. So I would say in terms of long-term belief and where it's at, and is it this speculative tulip bubble with no fundamental value? My counter to that tends to be twofold. First, there's a little bit of validity to the statement that it is a lot of speculation right now. So it's hyper volatile. Anyone looking to get into it should expect it to go up quickly, but be ready for it to go down just as quickly. That's, in my opinion, inevitable as we rise. Like, there are momentum traders out there, and their main objective and incentive is to kind of make money off of velocity in any direction. So if they can predict the price, then they'll trade derivatives, and the more they predict that accurately, the more money they make. So that's just inherent and isn't going to go away anytime. But in the long term, I do think that right now we're in a speculative phase, and the premier use for Bitcoin is just, if you believe in it, it's not to buy it and to go out and spend it on things necessarily. That, it's marginally good, but the premier use right now is just to store your wealth in it. It has this huge, there is certainly risk and downside, but the asymmetric upside is just unmatched in terms of, widely available assets out there. So right now, we are in a speculative phase. I think that speculative phase will last for many more years. But if that goes well and that kind of progresses and, Bitcoin becomes more liquid, then the more it succeeds at speculation and the more value is stored in it, the better it gradually becomes for exchange and payments, as there are more holders of it out in the world who understand its value and are willing to accept it for goods and services. And then eventually, there's kind of this last function of money called the unit of account, which is listing prices in it. So thinking about it as really the way that you measure your wealth. And if Bitcoin ever makes it there, it will not be for quite a while. But I think there's this reflex in people that I saw in myself as well, to immediately look at all these different functions of money and write off Bitcoin because it's not good at all of them at once. But that historically isn't how money has been adopted. Money will first really be tested as a collectible. And if it succeeds as a collectible, then it's tested as a store of value in the speculative phase. And that's where we're at right now. And then, it kind of progresses through these stages of medium of exchange after that, and ultimately unit of account after that. So I would encourage, Nick Szabo is a brilliant thinker in the cryptocurrency space as well, and has some wonderful blogs deeply rooted in history about development of money in ancient cultures, and would highly recommend those to interested listeners as well.
Okay. So it's really based on long-term adoption, essentially. So what do you think would be needed for that long-term adoption to happen? At what point would a society, or people in just general across the world or in a particular country, what would cause them to shift to adopting Bitcoin? What do you think? Is that just word of mouth and people spreading hopium, or is that some sort of, is it a crisis? Is it an economic crisis that plunges, I don't know, a country like Venezuela into a catastrophic state, and then people realize they need something like this? What do you think would drive that adoption?
Yeah, I think all those will be drivers to some extent over a long enough timeline. So in the next few years, I think the primary driver of wealth into the system is just going to be institutional on-ramps. So the last bubble that we saw in 2017 still seemed to be primarily retail driven. So average individuals, families signing up on websites like Coinbase and buying Bitcoin or on various exchanges. What hasn't really happened yet are institutions seriously allocating funds to this. So I think now in the last year during this bear market, there's been a lot of very promising and quiet building going on. So Fidelity, TD Ameritrade, Backed, which is the parent company of the New York Stock Exchange, these very reputable established institutions are now starting to build out infrastructure on Bitcoin to enable investors to get into Bitcoin. So for the sort of subsequent waves that we see, there will now be not only awareness, but also kind of the trusted ability for these hedge funds or pension funds and even venture capital funds with the right desire to acquire Bitcoin, where they just simply may not have been able to before.
Yeah.
So I think for the next few years, that will be the biggest driver of price. But long term, Bitcoin's competition with central banks is where I see it having the most importance in our society and the most potential to really go where it could. So that, I think, as you mentioned, there are countries today like Venezuela where their national currency is collapsing. They've had irresponsible monetary policy and they're having a difficult time recovering. And so a lot of people there are using Bitcoin as kind of a safe haven asset to store their wealth and protect their wealth, even just buy food and medicine in some simple cases.
Are people buying food and medicine with Bitcoin there?
They are. So there are super fascinating blogs out there of Venezuelans who are using mining of Bitcoin. And for anyone not familiar, there's this concept of mining where you essentially take a computer and connect it to the Bitcoin network and have it perform some operations that consume a lot of electricity. But if you do those well, then you can maybe earn some Bitcoin for doing that, is kind of the simplified version. So there are people out there who wanted refuge so badly from the currency collapse in Venezuela that they are setting up Bitcoin mining operations in their homes and acquiring Bitcoin that way, and then using that to kind of preserve their wealth and gradually either sell it off as needed to transact with others day to day, or potentially even find other people who are willing to accept Bitcoin directly, although I'm not sure how prevalent that is yet down there.
So is mining still, I mean, I don't think much about mining these days because it seems like lots of the mining is taking place in these huge sort of mining farms in China and a few other places. I mean, is mining still viable and profitable for the average person?
It requires, so Bitcoin is adaptive, and the more people who attempt to mine Bitcoin out there, the more difficult Bitcoin's algorithm adjusts to become in response to that. And that's to ensure that the monetary policy of Bitcoin stays intact. So there's kind of this schedule to when all of the Bitcoin will come into existence. 21 million total, but the supply schedule is fixed. So, roughly every 10 minutes, a certain number of new Bitcoin are brought into existence. And then that gets cut in half repeatedly over time until ultimately no more new Bitcoin ever. And mining is one thing that really drives the underlying mechanism that kind of drives and protects that process. So Bitcoin has so much popularity globally now that you can no longer mine it in ways that you once could. So in the very beginning years, you could throw a laptop, like you could have a MacBook and just throw it at Bitcoin and mine a lot, like 50 or 25 Bitcoin every 10 minutes, and you could kind of make things like that.
Gosh.
If you happened,
If
you happened to be aware of Bitcoin at the time, which I was not. Certainly wish I would have been. But as it gets Yeah, so as it gets more difficult, though, then you need more sophisticated and specialized hardware to do it. So CPUs, you could do it with at one point, and then eventually graphics processors like NVIDIA or AMD chips were required. And now, in order to mine Bitcoin, it's not even feasible with graphics cards any longer. You really need these special, they're called ASICs, application-specific integrated circuits. And so they're just like purpose-built computers, and they really do one thing in the world, and that is mine Bitcoin. A lot of the other cryptocurrencies out there do not have ASICs developed. Like, it takes millions of dollars to develop those types of chips. So the people who make them want to ensure that the coin is, going to be around, and there's going to be people buying their rigs for a long time. So that's well established, that industry in Bitcoin. But for some of the smaller cryptocurrencies, GPUs, graphics processors, are still the most efficient hardware to mine them with. So what people will often do is, if they have idle GPUs and the technical know-how, then they can kind of connect their home computer even to a mining pool, and maybe they'll mine Zcash or Ethereum or some other GPU-based coin, and then they can get paid either in that coin or even in Bitcoin for some cases. So like, if you had idle GPUs, you could mine another cryptocurrency and get compensated for that in Bitcoin by the mining pool. The economics of that, like, depending on your electricity cost, it may not be profitable, but if you are interested in just learning more about how mining works, being hands-on with it, or you have some unique circumstance, then that might be an attractive idea.
Got it. So you are what is called a Bitcoin maximalist, meaning that all your eggs are in the Bitcoin basket when it comes to cryptocurrency. So why is that? So what are your thoughts on, so at the moment, I think there's about 2,000 different cryptocurrencies listed on CoinMarketCap, and you've got some of the big ones like Ethereum, Ripple, Stellar, Neo, EOS. Like, there's a whole bunch of other coins out there. So what are your thoughts on other cryptocurrencies? And then following on from that, why is it that Bitcoin in particular is the one that you are so passionate about?
Sure. So I totally did not begin my journey into Bitcoin as a Bitcoin maximalist. And that term nowadays tends to have a negative connotation among some, and it comes with a lot of baggage and assumptions. So there are some Bitcoin maximalists out there who are quite extreme. And if you own or hold or in any way say anything nice about any digital currency other than Bitcoin, then you're just like dead to them.
Oh, wow.
I like to think I'm not quite that extreme. In fact, little confession, I do actually even hold a couple of other digital currencies, but I think the reason that I hold them is the key difference. So at one point, I held a bunch of cryptocurrencies because I thought, Bitcoin was the first, but it's not going to be the last. And all these others, like Ethereum and these others, are newer, and maybe they're Bitcoin 2.0. And I kind of, meandered through the altcoiner universe like that for a couple of years. But eventually I came back to, as you said, believing that really long-term Bitcoin is the most promising of these. It's been the top cryptocurrency in terms of market cap since inception, and there are no signs of that changing anytime soon. It has the most liquidity, the most institutional on-ramps are being built for it. So I nowadays still hold a couple of other coins, but I view that really as kind of a hedge, and with the expectation that we still have another incoming wave of new money into this space, right? So there are going to be a lot of people who get into this over the next couple of years, and they're going to think the same things that I mistakenly thought, which is, oh, this Ethereum thing seems like Bitcoin 2.0 or some other narratives like that. And so I hold a couple expecting that relative to Bitcoin, they might have some price increases. But my plan in that case is to try to time and to sell the top, and is very much a speculative exercise. I do not expect long-term to kind of hold those. It's more about trying to time a wave for me. So you hold
them because you basically, you want more Bitcoin. So
Absolutely. Yeah. I
yeah,
view altcoins as a tool for acquiring new Bitcoin.
got it. So out of all of them, I mean, are there any, I mean, you might not think this, but out of them, which do you think potentially could be the biggest threat to Bitcoin? I mean, for example, you've got some of the forks. So I know you've got this. This seems to become a little bit political from what I can gather online. But for example, you've
Oh,
got
yeah.
the Bitcoin fork, like Bitcoin Cash, and you've got people who are a lot more interested in Bitcoin Cash, including some really smart people who seem to be more interested in, say, Bitcoin Cash than Bitcoin, or some people with you already mentioned Ethereum. Some people think that, people used to talk about something called the flippening, which is when the market cap of Ethereum would overtake Bitcoin. And there was a time when that was looking sort of, I want to say late 2017, early 2018. That was looking pretty feasible at one point. And now the gap is a lot bigger. But do you think that those or any others or any that may come in the future could potentially, if not threaten Bitcoin directly as a challenger, perhaps be a number two or a number three that's not too far from it?
Yeah, I really don't think that any present a real threat to Bitcoin. My
Okay.
confidence in that has just increased more and more all of the time that I've been in the Bitcoin space. I do think you're right in that like the narrative and the hype and the marketing around many of these altcoins has been intense. So it gets a lot of media spotlight, and some of these other currencies are run by central institutions that have budgets and teams and humans who are focused on marketing and spreading the word. And despite not having that, Bitcoin continues to dominate. So I think that, like, realizing that is pretty impressive in itself. But what's also good, like if you go back in time and you look at the top 10 coins by market capitalization over every year for the last almost 10 years now, then Bitcoin is consistently number one, and the list of others changes a lot. So there's a lot of stuff that used to be on that list and is now dead in the water. There are some, like Litecoin and Ethereum since its inception, that have kind of hovered in second, third, and close by, but I don't think that they present a real threat to Bitcoin in the long run.
Yeah.
It's been, if you kind of look at the incentives of these alternative coins and currencies, the creators have been it's been lucrative to make other coins, frankly.
Yeah.
If you've had the technical know-how to create Litecoin or to create Ethereum and have these ICOs, then you as the creator have made a ton of money from that. And depending on when investors got in, maybe they made a ton of money too, but maybe they've lost a ton of money on them. And in the last couple of years, it's actually gotten a little more interesting because I think people kind of got worn out by the creation of all these new coins, and they thought, how else can we differentiate? And that's when they realized the value of Bitcoin's brand. And that kind of leads us into what you mentioned around forks and copies of Bitcoin itself. So starting around late 2017, there were attempts to really, in my opinion, hijack Bitcoin's brand, or at least ride the coattails of Bitcoin's success. Would Bitcoin Cash have nearly the market cap or popularity or amount of money and believers that it does if it didn't have the word Bitcoin in its name or its brand? I don't think so at all. And so I think, and now after Bitcoin Cash was created, now there's Bitcoin Diamond, Bitcoin Super, Bitcoin probably Platinum, and a lot of others that I've even lost track of by now. But I think those are just repeated attempts for the people driving these narratives to do well for themselves and to attempt to make money. That may be a little bit of a skeptical view of the ecosystem, but I really do think that one of the great things about it is that it is this free market system. And so we can argue on Twitter all day with people who think that Bitcoin Cash is the real Bitcoin or that some altcoin is better than Bitcoin. But like at the end of the day, you fork it and you create your coin, and you have to voluntarily convince people to follow you. And if you can convince people, then, and if you can't, then, global compete in the free market. The best win.
Yeah, man. Sorry, the signal got a little blurred up there, but I think hopefully that came through okay. And yeah, I was going to say, and even Bitcoin Cash itself had its own fork now. So I saw that split into Bitcoin Cash and then Bitcoin SV, and then SV seems to have gone through some drama. Like I don't follow all the politics. I have a sort of high level overview of what is going on, and I'm just kind of like, well, this is there's a lot of different Bitcoin thingies out there.
Oh yeah. The level at which you keep in touch with it is probably a very healthy level, because if you are like if you keep too close a pulse on it, the drama is just exhausting. Yeah. But yeah, you're right. Bitcoin Cash had its own fork, so now there are two different versions of that. One, like Bitcoin SV, is run by the complete, fraudster Craig Wright, who's claiming to be Satoshi Nakamoto. So it's kind of a circus. But,
which can't be true because I am.
Yeah, exactly, right? We all know Zuby's the real Satoshi.
Exactly.
We are all Satoshi except Craig Wright.
So, what was I going to say? So in terms of your involvement in the space and what you're doing, what is it that you are currently focusing on? You call yourself a Bitcoin educator. So what's the work you're doing in the space, really?
Yeah, so my involvement is, well, let's see, rewinding, like over the past few years, it's been a little bit informal. So, a lot of investing, but that was all kind of in Bitcoin and the protocols directly, and it was all just kind of personal investing. Now I'm kind of trying to focus on a couple of areas. So Bitcoin education is a big passion of mine. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest, and very rural, people who are not technical, and I go back and visit every year. And one of the things that those visits always remind me of are just how unaware of some of this a lot of the general population is, and pretty passionate about just talking about this stuff, helping people understand why Bitcoin is a really big deal. Mm-hmm. And so formalizing some things around that, I'm launching a Bitcoin educational company called Boulevard Bitcoin, named after the street in the small hometown that I grew up on. So it's going to be focused around just helping people really rock why Bitcoin to be meaningful, hopefully offering this balanced, objective view of it. And then also continuing to invest in this space. So have dabbled, I wouldn't say that I'm a prolific kind of startup investor by any means, but I'm quite passionate about certain aspects of Bitcoin and finance in this space in general. In particular, privacy and anonymity and the tools that I think will be useful and good to help people protect the money that they make and the savings that they have. I think we'll see a lot of friction in the coming years, maybe a light way to phrase it, over the traditional powerful entities in the world realizing that Bitcoin may present a threat to them.
I was literally gonna ask about that.
Yeah, and so I think the way to combat that is really with technology. So over the last few decades, it's been regulatory dominance, right? You have to wage these battles in rooms in Washington, D.C. and get political support for, and whoever outvotes who kind of wins. But Bitcoin moves the needle on that power structure, and it changes it in an important way. And now we can really be more effective and affect more change in the world thanks to the internet, thanks to Bitcoin, just by building and helping people adopt technology. And so I'm quite passionate about companies and entrepreneurs that want to further Bitcoin's privacy. I think all of the scalability narratives and the debate around Bitcoin's block size, all of that turmoil tends to be really overhyped. And what's underhyped, but there's been a lot of great innovation around recently, I'm thankful for, is privacy and anonymity. So I would love to help people build those tools. If there are entrepreneurs or teams out there doing things in that space, I'd love to talk.
Awesome. Yeah. So how do you think that the governments are going to respond to this? I mean, the Bitcoin and the whole cryptocurrency space. I mean, as the market cap grows, as those continue to kind of eat into the standard fiat legacy currency systems, how do you think governments are going to react? I mean, do you think they're I don't know. It's something I wonder sometimes. I mean, I don't think they're known to kind of just sit back and chill with all new technologies, especially something that poses this much of a potential threat to the status quo. But at the same time, I mean, I don't know what they can do without getting really draconian and, authoritarian. So what do you think?
I agree with your assessment. So I think it will take them a while, though, to realize the threat that it truly presents. So I'm hopeful in the near term that Bitcoin is viewed favorably from a regulatory perspective. So I hope that some of the cumbersome regulations around taxation, like right now, technically in the US, if you go and buy coffee with Bitcoin, that's a taxable event and you have to pay capital gains on it. And so there's just a lot that we can do to improve there, and a lot of, I think, mutual benefit to, to society if we go in a more Bitcoin friendly direction on some of that.
Quick question. Are there many places in around where you live or in California where you can do that, where you can buy coffee with Bitcoin?
There are a couple. I moved to Southern California more recently. I'm down by Orange County now. There's probably a handful of places locally. When I was up in San Francisco, there were a lot more. So I used to buy, I paid my doctor in Bitcoin. Expedia used to take Bitcoin for air travel. I'm not sure if they still do. I bought sushi in Bitcoin. I actually have this funny email that I look back on from time to time from 2014. And this sushi spot near the startup I worked at announced that they were going to start taking Bitcoin. So I was like, oh yeah, I want to spread the word about this stuff to the rest of the company. So I treated the office to lunch. So I bought like a $200 catering order for sushi. And I got this email from the guy who runs the restaurant. He's like, congratulations, you've placed San Francisco's first sushi catering order in Bitcoin. I felt so good about it. And now when I look back at that email in the price chart, I realized it's like an $8,000 lunch.
Was it like one Bitcoin for the lunch?
Yeah, like pretty much. It was about a one Bitcoin lunch. Yeah.
Oh, well.
And that, it wasn't, there are very well-known instances of people spending a lot more than that on food in Bitcoin's history. So, the most famous is referred to as Bitcoin Pizza Day. It's basically become a holiday among Bitcoiners now. So May 22nd, 2010, a software engineer named Laszlo paid 10,000 Bitcoin for 2 Papa John's pizzas. So, at the time it was like $41. And in today's terms, that's like, tens of millions. So I think those are fun anecdotes, but it's really driven home for me that the best strategy for Bitcoin that I would recommend to people right now is do not spend them unless you have a very compelling reason to. There are better apps and better currencies out there for buying coffee and pizza today. I would recommend hoarding your precious, scarce Bitcoin and accumulate, grow that stash, stack sats.
So there's a question, man. So if that's the primary motive and strategy for Bitcoin holders, who are the main adopters at the moment, do you think that another cryptocurrency is going to be the one that people actually spend and use for main transactions? And if so, what do you think that might be?
I suspect that rather than an entirely separate blockchain, entirely separate cryptocurrency, it may end up being a technology that's anchored to or built on top of Bitcoin itself in some way. So a really popular technology is the Lightning Network, and I am very bullish on the Lightning Network. So it's effectively a layer on top of Bitcoin. So it enables users to transact in very, very small amounts and very, very quickly, so low latency, neither of which tend to be practical if you're just using Bitcoin's base layer. Though the Bitcoin base layer transactions take at least minutes to confirm typically. and the fees associated with them can vary wildly. So it might be a few cents, it might be a few dollars, depending on the time of day and the popularity of the network. So Lightning gives you a way to kind of move up a layer where users essentially run software that takes some Bitcoin and uses Bitcoin's scripting facilities to protect that, but to kind of transact it with, like, to do a bunch of small transactions and then only settle the final balance of those n number of transactions at the very end. So maybe you and I open this payment channel and we're transacting via Lightning, and we could do 100 or 1,000 transactions, and the only time that we have to actually touch Bitcoin's underlying blockchain and deal with the associated fees would be at the beginning and the very end of that. Mm-hmm. So I think that those types of scalability technologies and applications that are built on Bitcoin will hopefully help enable use cases around smaller day-to-day payments, or even things like micropayments, which are fascinating to think about. So not just the small coffee stuff that we know money can do today, but the type of transactions that we've never been able to do in our lifetime because we haven't really had the technical ability. Like there's not before been a way to send a fraction of a penny to someone on the other side of the world. And now with Bitcoin, potentially Lightning or other related tech, there is. So what does that enable? Do we still need advertisements in streaming videos like YouTube, or can we just have the person streaming it compensate the person downloading it directly and take out the middleman?
Yeah.
I think a lot of the internet would look different architecturally if this protocol for money had existed at the time that it was created.
So that's the kind of thing that the Brave browser is currently working on with the basic attention token, which for people who don't know, it's a browser. It's called Brave. You can download that. And basically, yeah, if you're watching YouTube videos or visiting websites and things like that, you can actively tip people, or there's also sort of a passive function where you're basically rewarding the person who created that video or created that content just by being on that page and spending time there. They get a little bit of a kickback through micropayments and cryptocurrency for that. So I think that's a really exciting project as well.
Yeah, definitely. I'm a Brave user myself. One interesting recent development there is that, so the one part that I like to tease is annoying about Brave is that, these content creators, after they've earned their BAT tokens, they have to go and actually trade them for something of long-term value like Bitcoin. That's the snarky Bitcoin maximalist in me. Yeah. But there's another company out there, Gab, and they, kind of run the free speech oriented social media platform. And a few weeks ago, they announced that they are copying the Brave project. So they're creating their own fork, and they're going to replace all of the BAT token elements with Bitcoin directly. Mm-hmm. I do like the Brave team. I like Brendan Eich and all the builders there. And I am hopeful that they would, over a long enough timeline, if they see the right demand, they would just put Bitcoin back directly into Brave and kind of simplify the experience. But I love what Gab is doing with that and has been doing lately. So shout out to them too.
Awesome, man. So yeah, I'm just so we can't talk about Bitcoin and not talk about price and price predictions. I know it's some people don't like to talk about it. Some people, that's all they talk about. But if we're talking about, market cap, we're talking about adoption, we're talking about price. I mean, if things go to plan and the vision that you obviously clearly believe is going to pan out and we reach this world, I don't know if it's in a decade, I don't know if it's in 2 decades, I don't know if it's in 3 decades, but we reach a period where, everyone or almost everyone is holding and using Bitcoin. I mean, how much of a market share do you see it taking? And what sort of price do you think it could realistically get up to? You see so many different numbers thrown out there, but, what do you think is realistic?
Yeah, in the short term, I would say what I like to do, not being a particularly good, very, very short term day trader or anything along those lines, being more of a long-term investor, what I like to set for myself are surprise thresholds. So, and mine tend to be very wide. So I don't know what Bitcoin will be at in a few months, but I kind of know a low amount that I would be surprised if it dropped beneath, and a high amount that I would be very surprised if it exceeded. And I would say my surprise amounts would be $1,500 on the low end. It would very much surprise me if Bitcoin dropped below that in the next couple of years. And then on the upside, $100,000 on the upside.
Okay.
And we're at, as of this recording, we're about 8,000 right now. It has been a wonderful few recent weeks for Bitcoin. So it was about $3,200 a few weeks ago, and it's had a great couple weeks, run up to about 8,000. I think its scarcity is really underestimated, underappreciated, less understood. We've not really ever dealt with an asset in history that is as scarce as Bitcoin, except maybe time in our lives.
Yeah.
So I could see it having some parabolic advances that blow a lot of minds. But if, my long-term strategy is to just kind of zen out, be patient, believe, spread the good word,
and just get on with life. So how long do you think it would take for, you were talking about adoption curves earlier. You talked about the internet, you talked about mobile phones, social media, all of those things most of those have been, I want to say, around 2-decade process, roughly. Do you think that Bitcoin would be similar or, different?
Yeah, I do think the most important metric right now is price and market cap, even though it seems a little bit shallow, but that represents the amount of wealth, like the amount of people who have really opted into this new system and kind of where we're at in this journey. So I would say, I see it going to hundreds of thousands of dollars in the next few years. I think further out than that, $1 million per Bitcoin is very, very realistic. So I'm kind of investing accordingly, and there's trillions of dollars of value floating around in the current financial system. And even if Bitcoin fails at some of the use cases like micropayments, that I don't think it will. I'm optimistic there, and I think it could capture those. But even if it doesn't, and it just technically remains what it is today, as kind of this digital gold store of value, then the upside is still enormous. The amount of gold in, like, the market cap of above ground gold in the world is roughly $7 trillion. And the market cap of Bitcoin, as we're recording this, is about $140 billion.
Yep.
So that, even if it just does the gold use case well, that's a ton of upside. Yeah.
What I also think is, I think that with the sort of the incoming generation, obviously younger generations, naturally gravitate more towards new technology and are much quicker to embrace it. You've seen that with the internet, with mobiles, with social media, with smartphones. The younger generation, like something like Bitcoin. Of course, you do have people who are older, but lots of people who are in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. Just like a lot of them don't really get Twitter, or some of them are just coming around to Facebook now, right? They don't really get a lot of these new technologies or video games or VR and stuff like that. So I think you're always going to get a heavy dose of skepticism on that end, and those are also tend to be the people who have the most money to invest in things like that, but they've also got the lowest risk tolerance, which makes sense. But I do think with the younger generation that are coming up, people who are, I don't know, someone who's 10 years old right now, by the time they're in their 20s or they're in their 30s or whatever, I just think that a lot of these technologies and the idea of, you're already seeing people moving away from feeling like something has to be physical for it to exist or to have value, right? So I think that they will, I'm pretty confident that they will just embrace it. And they'll just get it. I think it'll just kind of click. Kind of like how my 3-year-old nephew can, grab an iPad and flick it around, and he knows how to, you know what I mean? Like that.
Oh yeah.
Right?
I'm right there with you. I think that's spot on. It's so much more intuitive for the younger generation, right? Yeah. And I had similar, I was looking at a small relative the other week who was, unlocking a phone, like swiping on a phone, and he was just so intuitive and eye-opening for me to think about, if they're that good at it that young an age, how intuitive is going to feel when they're even older. So I think they'll be very open, amenable to Bitcoin. I also think that adoption of other promising technology like virtual reality and even just the esports and video game scenes of today, I think those are killer ecosystems for Bitcoin. So, if you are online in some virtual reality app or space and you want to do some exchange, then you can do that using Bitcoin, and it can just be kind of this native currency for the internet, as Jack Dorsey kind of phrased it. And I like that a lot. I think it's got potential for a lot of emerging tech.
Awesome, man. Well, we're coming up to about an hour right now, Stephen. So before we wrap up, is there anything you want to announce, and also let people know where they can find and follow your work online?
Yeah, I would say, so I'm around the Southern California area, as I mentioned earlier. Entrepreneurs, people in the Bitcoin, even just people in the Bitcoin space, love connecting with. I run a meetup group down here in SoCal called the OC Bitcoin Network. So check that out if you're local. I'm pretty active on Twitter, throwing some hopium and some Bitcoin related tweets out there. So my Twitter is SThenC, STHENC. And just excited to kind of see where this space goes. Appreciate you having me on.
No doubt, bro. It's been great to have you on the show.
Cool. Thanks, Zuby.
Awesome. Stephen Cole, thank you for joining a Real Talk with Zuby.
Yeah.